Hey guys, what's up? Happy Monday. It's Lizzy Jane. I'm so stoked to be back with another stellar episode. We have Lance Dunlap, talent buyer for Global Dance Music Festival, Decadence NYE, and Supernatural joining us today, but that does not limit his career journey. He has had his foot in so many projects. I learned so much from this conversation. If you're curious as to who books your favorite acts in your city, who develops them from playing very small venues to large venues to Red Rocks to headlining festivals, this is the conversation for you to listen to. We discuss everything from building an artist in a market to how festivals are different than club shows and everything in between. Big thanks to Lance for his time to come and sit down with me and let me pick his brain. Again, I learned so much and I hope you guys do too. Make sure to drop any questions you have on the YouTube video in the comments. I can't wait to read them all. And don't forget, you can only listen to this episode ad-free on my Patreon at www.patreon.com/This Is Lizzy Jane for exclusive content, bloopers, one-on-one lessons, group lessons, and more. Make sure to hit the link in the description and go and check it out. Without further ado, I hope you guys have a stellar week. This is Lizzy Jane, and you're tuning into my podcast with Lance Dunlap. The show today was brought to you by Plethora E-Boost Gum. With no pill to take or powders to mix, Plethora E-Boost Gum is a first-of-its-kind energy rave supplement that provides magnesium, electrolytes, and antioxidants while you chew. Plethora is the perfect complement to my active lifestyle, whether it's at the festival, on the road touring, or hitting the gym. Chew Plethora and dance with confidence. Use code Lizzy Jane for 10% off any order. All right, Lance, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
I greatly appreciate it. I mean, just as we were talking, this is a super cool moment to kind of go to the other end of the music industry, highlight some of the things that you do as a talent buyer, an artist manager, I'm sure previously promoter. And it's just so cool to take a transparent look into what makes the festival circuit and the touring circuit go round.
Sure.
Because talent buying is such, I would say, one of the most important parts in developing an artist in a certain market. You also, I mean, before we get into it, you are one of the biggest talent buyers in Denver.
Oh,
period. You're talent
it.
buying for everything with Global Dance as far as their club plays, their festival plays. I know you have a hand in Decadence and so on and so forth. And it definitely takes a good amount of time to establish yourself as an industry professional to get to that point.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite impressive, especially for somebody as young as you, working in the music industry. Takes lots of diligence, lots of hard work. Before we get into it, if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about what you do, what is a talent buyer? You know, just separating yourself from your artist management position quickly.
Sure.
So our listeners can know if they're not previously knowledgeable.
Yeah, totally. So as a talent buyer, my core task is to basically book and curate all of our events, whether that's nightclubs, hard ticket shows, or festivals. So taking all the musical direction, kind of leading that programming. And once we're booked and programmed, then it's overseeing the marketing, execution of ticket sales, and the operations and flow of the whole show. So it's kind of a holistic position, but it's
so
kind of a hand in everything, but a focus is on the talent itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you yourself, I feel as artists, we have to wear a multitude of hats, especially if you're an up and coming project where, hey, you've got to have that online presence. You've got to be making the music. You've got to be, networking, building connections, all of that stuff.
I feel every role within the music industry always wears several hats, right? And same goes from the artist perspective, from a promoter perspective to everywhere in between, right?
So. Exactly. And it sounds like that is very much so what you do at Global Dance. I know at Global Dance, you guys run a pretty tight ship with a select few group of people that make just these massive events happen every quarter. You know, you have weekly events at Church, which is a local nightclub here. You do stuff here at Temple. You do stuff at Larimere Lounge. Tell me about your journey starting out. I know people like Alex Shambach, talent buyers who I've kind of have become friends over the years, you know, they all kind of started as either candy kids or street promoters or people who just loved this type of music and this environment so much so that it's okay, how do I get involved? How do I do this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and give you like the Cliff Notes.
Yeah,
version,
absolutely.
Yeah,
No, it's
I mean,
okay.
so it started
Go for
like
it.
in high school. I was like the drummer for a touring band, and like so I come from like the pop punk kind of like emo phase of things, right? And I feel like a lot of people have a similar story for some reason that ended up in electronic music.
Yep.
But that being said, you know, that was through high school, and then as I went to college, I was studying audio engineering. And then like 2 years into that program, I started to shift more towards the business side of things because the marketing aspect was really interesting to me. And my freshman year of college is when my friends dragged me out to my first like club show. And it was the first time I ever experienced any sort of electronic music. And I'm like, holy shit, you know, like this DJ's up there, like the energy, like what's really cool about electronic music, I think, is the culture and like the foundation beneath it. You know, I think that resonates within a lot of genres, but even more so in electronic music, there's like a real sense of community. So like I walked into this dark nightclub, I see this DJ doing his thing, and like everybody was having a blast. And from coming from like the band perspective where it's, you know, a lot of loading in gear and sitting around.
You have your
like,
backline, you have your bandwagon.
It was a totally different experience. And that like really captivated me. Not only because it was something new and fresh than what I was used to, but like I said, just like the welcomeness and I guess just feeling like in a safe space and hearing new, refreshing music, like really caught me out of the gate. So as I was in college, my musical taste started to shift more towards electronic, just naturally. And I was going to more and more shows. And at the time, there was a club opening here in town called Beta. And so I got on MySpace. I searched this Beta nightclub thing.
MySpace.
And I'm like, hey, I want to start going to shows for free. Like anything I can do to help. And they're like, cool. Like want to pass out flyers because I was at C Boulder at the time. So I'm like, cool. I'll be the Boulder kid, you know? And one thing led to another. I got an internship marketing there. And a lot of, you know, between then and now has been, you know, I've been fortunate with the timing and had some really good mentors along the way. So I shifted from marketing. A few years into that is when I started learning how to talent buy. And then my boss at the time was starting a family and it was her time to exit. And that was just like the natural step to become the talent buyer for that club. And I did that for about 6 years at that venue. And so I was there for a little over 10 years in total. And
put your time in.
Yeah, I put my time in. So definitely sank my teeth well into the club culture. You know, within electronic music. At that point, after that run of a decade at that club, I was kind of ready to spread my wings a little bit further. And conveniently, I was approached by Live Nation here in town, and they were looking to expand like their electronic, I guess, footprint in the market, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. So I took that gig and did that pretty much until the pandemic hit. And then pandemic hit, and obviously we're pretty much all decimated.
Wiped out completely.
Sitting at home, twiddling our thumbs, like, what do I do with my life?
And we could make music. You guys just had to like stare at a wall.
We're like, you know,
you're
doing
like
the drive-in thing, doing the online stuff, which was like, we made the best of what we could with it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think everybody was in the same boat. It was like, we can't just sit here and be stale for 2 years. We have to maintain relevance. We have to keep those connections, you know, relationships, as you know, in the industry go a long way. So to like just go radio silent is, you know, a lot of people exited the industry or didn't make it through, but the ones that did, it was so important to keep in touch with all those people. And so that, you know, after being furloughed, you know, they furloughed all of us. So we were like, what do we do? And I'm really lucky that I've, you know, maintained friendships with a gentleman that runs Global Dance here in town named Ha. We were golfing a lot.
Also a Lennium's manager.
Name drop.
Make that connection real quick.
And he's just been a fantastic friend. We did club nights at the club that I told you about, Beta. Okay. So I'd known him for well over a decade. Wow. And so we were just golfing a lot through the pandemic. And he's like, you know what? Like, if you don't want to wait around for, you know, returning to one of the corporates or whatever, he's like, I've been looking for a buyer in the market, you know, just because he's been busy with other things. And it was, again, like I said, perfect timing.
You're like, let's go.
It was a friendship turned into a work thing. And, you know, I was lucky to start a new job in the middle of a pandemic. So 4 months after that started, we were doing our first shows as things reopened. So, and since then it's been a year and a half of funness, but yeah, here we are.
I mean, it's so crazy. The whole journey, I mean, not only like on your side too, where just as much of an artist, you know, when you get to a certain point, you realize that no one is an overnight success. Sure. It's at least, I would say, a good 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years in the book before you actually start appearing on certain markets, doing the festival circuit, getting picked up by one of the large corporate agencies.
Totally.
And then you're the overnight success.
I think it's important, though, to have that experience, right? And kind of getting a taste of everything. And from an artist perspective, I think you have a larger goal is to, like, reach that point of success. But at the same time, it's also good to kind of like dabble in different lanes.
Yes.
Do you want to be strictly a DJ? Do you want to be a hybrid live set? Like there's so many different avenues within
so important.
the artist craft that you could go down too, right?
And appreciating the journey is so important. And I know a lot of us on both sides, I have so many friends who started kind of in the same position as me, same position of you, walked into this culture, walked into this space. You're like, wow, I personally was in a metal band touring for 3 years.
Okay,
so
cool.
like same thing. My first show was Borgore. I was like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
All these girls are way too naked for me. I don't know if I can do
like,
this.
Where are your clothes?
And then I came back and I saw RL Grime on the Void tour and I saw this and I was like, wow, this is super special. How do you go from this consumer side into the other side? Because I personally used to think a festival would just like pop out of a clown box and then all of the stages are set up and the artists are there and it's just there. But to hear that on your side as well, you know, you had a very similarly timed journey as far as putting in your time, doing the hours as a street promoter, working your way up with one company. And then so much of it, I feel like, is like that 98% of really, really hard work and that 2% of right time, right place, developing the right relationships.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's so similar on both sides, and both sides are just so important. It's like this like game of tennis, almost like we were talking about your last name. You know, that you gotta pitch the ball back and forth because if one side's not working, the other side can't work.
Totally.
And in COVID, I think it was just such an eye opener and a slap in the face for so many artists, for so many industry professionals, where it's like, how do I provide my value in a space that's no longer existing in a live market?
Yeah.
And I look at somebody like Ha, and it's like, from what I've heard from my personal interactions with him, he's just so on a very much so forward thinking standpoint.
Yeah.
How do we do this better? How do we do this next? How do we adapt this to Web3? How do we adapt this to all of this other stuff?
Yeah.
So for you to have a mentor like him and be brought under his wing to now be doing all of the largest events debatably in this city, you know, besides, and even with Red Rocks, you're involved in Red Rocks too. You know, Global does so many shows there.
Yep.
It's just it's so cool, and it's just so similar, that route of progression.
Yeah.
And as far as your standpoint of talent buying, so you are per se one of the buyers underneath like the Global Dance umbrella.
Right.
So are there a multitude of you? Are you in a certain division? How does that work?
It's just Ha and I over at Global,
That's
and
so,
you know, he's cultivated and built this company, you know, for the past 25 years or so. So it's kind of like getting handed the keys to a Ferrari, right? Like he's had these well-established festivals, he's had these long-running club nights, which is great. So it's like there was already a foundation walking into it. And you know, my objective as a new buyer for him is to expand upon that, right? So maintaining everything we do currently, and then expanding into other markets and more venues and show volume and stuff like that. But yeah, so it's just really at the core, him and I.
That's amazing.
He's more active in the festival space, and I kind of do everything in the festival space and below that. So, like you said, he's kind of wearing a couple hats and has his hands busy with some other projects. But yeah, I mean, we're very close. We talk about a majority of things, and
That's
like
amazing.
I said, it's pretty routine. You know, we do over 150 club shows a year, which is, you know, for one city is a lot, you know, across multitude of venues here. And then we have our 3 flagship festivals. So,
and and I mean, that's just, it sounds like a very, again, tight ship ran with a very dedicated group of individuals underneath the two of you.
Totally.
So walk me through the process of like talent buying for Dummies 101.
Talent buying for Dummies 101.
Yes. Your process of like, so when an artist, for like those listening, you know, receives an offer, we receive an offer from a talent buyer. We have to review it. We may do a counter offer. We may do, here's the radius clause. Can we negotiate this? Can we negotiate that?
Sure.
But from your end, you know, when you're looking to either build a progression of club shows up into a certain event, you know, just focusing on the club shows now, how do you approach those things? Are you going to an agency and they're saying, here's what we have, you know, you're booking this person, take these people. How does it work in your alley?
I mean, it's a two-way street, as with a lot of like the I guess mechanics of the industry, right? There's going to be artists that I'm always seeking, you know, the big names and stuff like that, and the well-established things. But I'm also getting constantly pitched a lot of stuff from the agents, from the managers, meeting artists themselves. So I guess when it comes to club stuff, you know, I kind of look at I would call it like three main components when I'm looking at an artist, whether I want to book them for a club, a hard ticket show, or a festival. And first and foremost is the music, the art, right? That really has to resonate. There has to be somewhat of a unique aspect to it or something that stands out. I mean, that's really what carries an act is, at the foundation and core is like the music itself. And then second and third, and I wouldn't say they're in one order, they're pretty equivalent, is the team behind an artist, whether they have a good vision, good manager, good agent, having a good team surrounding them definitely helps amplify the project. And then the brandability and marketability of the act or the show that they're being added to, right? Because the goal for me is to sell tickets, right? But also provide, a great experience for the fans, both musically, visually, and everything in between. So those are like the three components I look at. And what's cool about the current company that I work for is that as an independent promoter, we have access to the nightclubs, to the hard ticket rooms, and the festivals. So to look at an artist and say, here's your roadmap, right? I'm going to get you the club show, the hard ticket show, and the festival. And we can kind of lay out like a year plan as opposed to really just focusing on one aspect, right? Because I think a lot of artists, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like you want to see the vision. If you're going to work with a promoter, it's more advantageous to kind of get a plan in place than just like these one and done and, play the show, see you later, right? Like what's the long-term goal? Like we both want to go this way, right? So how do we do that together? So that's kind of my strategy. But to take a step back, or I guess to focus on your main question is like an offer. There's really kind of two offers. One is more like a flat fee, whether that includes hotels and ground transportation, but it's just like, here's all the money and maybe there's some bonuses if you sell X amount of tickets.
Yeah.
And then there's versus deals, right? That are a lot more in the hard ticket space where it's like, you get a certain amount of money and then based on the show's performance, you can make more or less.
Like a door deal per se.
Essentially, yeah. And they could be zero versus an amount or a flat guarantee versus an amount. So there's those are the two main, I guess, like offers you would see.
Yeah.
And then the different components of an offer, there's quite a few, right? Like you had listed, there's ticket price. How do we want to price the show? We want to price it to move, but we also want to price it so that everybody can make money. There's the radius, which is like, can you play any shows in the city, in the state before or after the show? Because that affects your planning as an artist, you know, like you don't want to be radius out of the state for a whole year or whatever, so that's one thing. Like I said, whether there's ground transportation and that's, or flights, any of that stuff, hotel rooms, any of the extra expenses that an artist incurs that a lot of people don't think of could be negotiated during this process of an offer. I'm trying to think of what else are like the key.
No, that's so good. Because you're
right?
like, it's kind of like a Venn diagram. You're deciphering like all of these different components that an agent or, when an agent sends to a manager would review with their client before saying, okay, this is a good play. This is whatever. Are you sometimes sending there's this unique thing that I very much so saw in Florida with like Sunset Events and Sunset Music Festival where would you potentially send an offer for, hey, we want you to do this club show at church, and then we want you to come back and play Decadence?
Yeah.
Would those be bundled together?
We can either bundle them or just have more of like an agreement that that's the plan in place, right?
Yep.
Because a lot of times we'll agree to stuff like that, but another opportunity might come across the plate where they're like, hey, we actually want to do this, and then come back and play the festival next year. So we don't do a lot of like the actual package deals, I would say, but it's more, like I said, that conversation is well in place of like, what do you want to do? Like, I'll give you your club show, then you play support on this show, and then the festival later in the year. And all of those are kind of interchangeable based on timing, right?
Absolutely.
So if you're in an album cycle or if you just want to do one-off shows, like we have the flexibility to kind of maneuver that plan around. But yes, awesome. I think, a lot of that conversation is packaged with other things, especially in the nightclub setting, because the goal is to, nightclubs are built in, they're soft, so to speak, right? So it's like those are easier to line up for a lot of artists, whereas like they want to see what's their next move. How do they get bigger in the market, So
yes.
Those conversations are very common.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel with like Global Dance, since it is like a very like market focused, like versus somebody like Insomniacs or Disco Donnie where they've got all these pockets and everywhere, it's so, I think it has such a big potential for an artist to grow within the market, within developing a relationship with you guys.
Sure.
And so since you have such an array of venues to choose from, when you're first introducing somebody to a market, are you traditionally going to go soft club, then small venue, hard ticket, and then festival? Or would it be like a variety? Does it depend if they're on an agency or if they're with a boutique?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, like you want to go the nightclub route, and that doesn't have to be one of the bigger clubs. You know, you can start at the smaller clubs in town, the 250, 500 ticket rooms, because having that soft element, and for those that don't know, soft is kind of like built-in crowd, so to speak. The nightclubs are where it's at, right? Because you can open your doors and you usually have a couple hundred people there, regardless of who's playing. So it's a great way to break artists in the market, but then you're going to have those anomaly artists that just kind of have, you know, a big record out of the bat or something that can jump straight into hard tickets. So it is a case by case. There isn't like a set formula to like how you, the roadmap to the market, so to speak, you know, but 9 times out of 10, I would say the nightclubs kind of start a lot of people's careers. And then move your way up. And usually it's a cycle of like nightclub, smaller hard ticket, support on a larger show, a festival look, and then like a rotation of those latter 3 until you're headlining your own shows, and then you're just escalating rooms. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And like as an artist, you know, one of our goals is, you know, for most artists is to, one, the agent is always so important. But now, especially, I think coming back from COVID more than ever, where unfortunately you saw a lot of agencies that were more boutique shut their doors. You know, you're definitely going into a more corporatized, you know, capitalistic space where as an artist, you know, we have a goal, like I have a goal to be on, you know, one of the 2 majors. You're looking at UTA, you're looking at Wasserman, you're looking at WME, you're looking at CAA, and then you've got like an array of boutiques underneath. Now, as a buyer, I know most buyers are, you know, majority, just because you have to pull in those big names, they're going to have big agents on these corporate agencies. Do you have unique situations where you will seek out artists that do not have representation on one of those major 2, 3, 4 agencies?
Totally. And I think that's a component that like a lot of buyers all know that we work on to do our best. But you know, a lot of people look at a lineup from the public's perspective of just the artist, right? I like to go a layer deeper and look at what agencies do I have represented, because it's not fair to really, you know, like you said, a lot of the majors will represent a bulk of the larger names, which is great. And you need those names on the roster, but you have to think 3, 5, 10 years down the plan. Like we're going to need those up and coming people that are those superstars 5, 7 years from now. So it's important that we support not only those acts, but the agencies and the people and their teams that are getting behind those acts, you know, early on in that stage. So yes, to answer your question, we do seek out that stuff. It's more difficult on the smaller festivals when we don't have as many stages or slots to work with. Obviously the larger events, there's more inventory and it gives me more wiggle room to kind of get behind some of the more bubbly, buzzy acts, aside from just like going all headliners, you know?
Absolutely. And, you know, there's a big stigmatism, like on our side, if we're talking in our Discord or, you know, just as an artist, I feel like when you start, as you are like an artist, you know, manager as well, where you have like a very close relationship with Pause, with Austin, I'm sure, you know, as an artist, your first focus is always and should be always making the music. And then as you kind of escalate to a certain level, you start to become curious of like, okay, what does a manager do? What does an agent do? You know, how are these lineups being formulated? How do I get on these lineups? How do I break out of the local circuit into, you know, either a regional or a national touring circuit via getting picked up on a tour or, you know, getting with a larger agent from a larger corporate agency? You know, it's just from our end, we look at a lot of these lineups, and through my time, and I would love to hear from, you know, your personal perspective, the majority of like a talent buyer's budget is in those top names, in those headliners, in those hard ticket sales, the people doing 2 nights at Red Rocks, selling them out, doing a night at Mission, selling it out, because you know that the general consumer is going to care mostly about those people. Now, when you seek out someone like Lenium, like Porter Robinson, like Flume, are you combated with a counter of, if you want this act, this A tier act, you need to take 10 of our acts that we just signed as up and comers?
I would say it's pitched, but it's not like, it's not mandatory,
unnecessary,
right? But I think that's what agents and managers are great at. And that's why it's important to have one of those on your team when your career is ready for it, right? Because they do have, their job, you know, is to actively be picking up and signing new cool acts that are going to be, like I said, that next superstar. So yes, as we're discussing the big names, all the time get pitched, you know, hey, since we're doing this act for you, you know, can we look at this for the undercard or this for the mid-level stuff? And it's never overly aggressive, and they're never never artists like too tied together. Like you need to book this act if you're going to book this act.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's that fine line that a lot of people walk, and which is, I mean, that's part of the industry, right?
Yes.
So, but to your point, no, I mean, and it is super important, like I said, to have those acts on there because you really, I mean, as much as people just want to see all the big names, like there's kids out there that want to hear and be exposed to new
so
stuff.
much more than ever.
And
now.
that's one of the funnest aspects of being a talent buyer is like having our ear to the ground and being able to be like, hey, like a lot of people might not know this act, but we got to put them in front of this crowd and expose them because we believe in the project and the music, right?
Yes.
So it's a very, I feel like talent buyers and artists have a closer relationship than people think because it's like we have the platform to help put you guys on, but we also want to amplify you and be your partner, your promotional partner to take you to that next level, you know, to grow you to the Red Rocks. So,
and putting an artist in front of the right crowd is so important
Totally.
because I feel like if you take an artist and you put them in front of the wrong crowd, it's kind of like this like math equation where you're canceling each other out. You're like, wow, this is like a stellar act, but they're not stellar for like this demographic.
Sure.
And I feel like you definitely see that happen sometimes, and that's why it's so important to have the right agent in your corner, the right manager in your corner to know, you know, to know the power of no, to know, yeah, this is a great play. Let's take half of what we would normally play because it's a fucking stellar
it's a
opportunity.
Good look. It's a great
and
slot.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And then
totally.
you turn around and you say, okay, now to make up for that, we're going to do a small club play where this is going to be a cash grab. It's a seat promoter, seat buyer.
Totally.
And you balance those two opportunities out.
And to your point, I think a lot of people just kind of like, you know, they think it's all about the money, right? Like you're paying XYZ artists this much money, but to your point, there's so many other factors that go into a deal, you know, whether it's other attachments or other shows to follow, or just having a big crowd to put them in front of, or a strong slot to put them in front of a large crowd. You know, there's so many other, I guess, variables and factors as an artist that you can consider aside from the dollar amount.
Yes, absolutely. And those all have to be considered because I think I once had somebody like say to me, like, you know, you have to be realistic and understand that you do have a goal to monetize your project. It's very much so like starting your own business, you know, starting a startup, you're going to put in those 5-10 years where you're potentially not even going to break even before you start to see that dollar amount, but taking that kind of puzzle where you go, the crowd size, is this an act I want to align myself with? Are we willing to take this? You know, I know a lot of people get brought on and exposed to new markets through being support acts on tours where they're really not getting paid a lot, but they're getting put in all of these new markets with these new buyers that in turn their manager, their agent can follow up and say, hey, here's their new music. Do we have a small venue that we can put them in? That's why I love like Larimere Lounge. You know, you can bring somebody here, they can play as support for, you know, Ganja White Night and then turn around and say, okay, we're going to do a 200 person hard ticket Larimere.
Totally. And that's kind of like the first step in their like trajectory in the Colorado landscape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would imagine as a buyer, you know, the soft tickets are great and they're great ways to introduce somebody to the market, but hard tickets are, I would say, more valuable. Is that true?
Hard tickets are a better representation of the act's true value in market, right? Because it's like I was saying, you can open the doors to a nightclub and a couple hundred people are just going to wander in, right? Especially in downtown Denver.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, that's not a real fair.
It's a double-edged sword.
Obviously some shows will do better than others and that stands out, right? But yes, to your point, a hard ticket show is really where you're like, okay, this is the show's on them, the pressure's on them and the promoter to sell the tickets, right? So this is a really good test to see their value. And that's why, you know, a lot of people will do a larger nightclub and then you see them play a 200 cap room. It's like, well, because all the pressure's on them in that 200 cap room.
Like, how can they really truly perform bringing out a crowd on a Thursday night?
But like I said, you know, as much as like just how the money isn't all the single aspect of an offer or something, it's not all about the ticket sales. There's larger and other components that go into it. Like I said, you know, the vision, the brand, the marketability, you know, where, and some artists work in some settings and not in others, you know, everybody's unique. There really is no like single track to success, which it takes a while to learn. And I think, like I said, it's important to kind of dabble in all these different fields of the industry and like see what people do, you know. On my end of things, it was important for me working at Live Nation just to like overhear the Ticketmaster stuff and hear all the stuff the ticketing goes through, and working at a nightclub and seeing and hearing all the operations. Like there's so many components to a show, you know, and in the live event space that a lot of people, I wouldn't say take for granted, but it's just kind of on autopilot. Like you expect there to be bars and water and clean bathrooms, but like it takes a village to produce that kind of, especially on a festival level. So point being, you know, I think it's super important that, you know, anybody that's trying to get into this, whether you're an artist, manager, whatever, just
Know all
to
the
make
roles.
all those connections, right? And also never take for granted like the conversations you have and the people you're around, because it's not been the first time where I've met somebody and circled back with them almost 10 years later and been like, wow, like so glad we maintained a good relationship, you know. Or it's like you never know who you're going to end up working for, what you're going to end up doing. So relationships are such a key thing, and like I said, nobody's ever too cool or too big, and it's super important to surround yourself with the people that are doing what you think you want to do, even if you learn that it's not that route, you know. Like say you think you want to be an agent, and then 2 years later you're like, actually I want to shift to being a promoter. There's a lot of similarities in the concept and the job description, so to speak, so I guess point being, never hurts to network. It's super important. Go to as many shows as you can, talk to as many people as you can. Nobody's too cool for school.
That was a huge thing before
Yeah.
I became a closet human during COVID.
Yeah.
Was like being, I think, especially if you're like a local, new producer or you just want to DJ
Yeah.
and be an opener slot, like being part of the community, especially with smaller, I think, promotion companies that would take a chance on somebody who's never played a show before.
Totally.
Like being there, being present, supporting their other events, like that's so important until the point where, you get to a level where you can start to build a team and have people who are interested in your project and in your vision.
Totally.
And especially from an artist's point of view, and I'm sure from any other side, like just you being knowledgeable on all of these little things that have to happen
Sure.
for a festival to take place, like as you are the talent buyer, that's so important. And I feel like as an artist, you sometimes see, unfortunately, people sometimes get like taken advantage of when they're not knowledgeable about the things that members of their team or members in this industry should be doing to contribute to your project or somebody else's project or the big, wheel of the music industry.
Totally.
And a big thing that I would always say is like, be knowledgeable about what your manager is supposed to be doing. Be knowledgeable about what your agent's supposed to be doing, because at the end of the day, they do work for you. You don't work for them. And there has to be some level of belief, because obviously, as you do work with artists, it's a huge uphill battle to get to a point where you start to sustain yourself and become profitable and all X, Y, and Z. And
100%.
People like you are working for free for so long.
Sure.
And I think that does like segue into the part where I see so many talent buyers, you, Kyle, Alex, who are also artist managers.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me about your journey there. Like, did you always want to be an artist manager? I know you were in audio engineering, so it's like, how did that come about?
Yeah, Austin and I have been friends, just like you said, for the better part of a decade. We've been in the same circle of friends and whatnot. And, as I developed as a promoter, I think there's a lot of commonalities between management and promoters. The greater good is to always build. And I see there being a lot of, I guess, apples to apples scenarios between what a promoter does and a manager does. And it's how do we get our shows and our artists to the peak, right? And so Austin was looking for representation at the time and approached me, and I was like, why not? Let's give it a shot, and it's been fun. It's been just under a year, and I just signed another act here, Bass Physics, which is
I saw that you shared his thing because he's doing stuff with Sodown.
Yeah,
right?
He's on the Sodown tour starting this weekend. So it's been fun, and I don't come from a management background, but like I said, having the knowledge that I've picked up as a promoter and talent buyer, I feel like qualifies me to help guide these guys.
Yes.
Now, I wouldn't say I'm, by all means an artist manager. I'm more of a strategic partner, more or less, on the promotion side. And I obviously have the platform to help put these guys on in the live space, but that's just a small component, first and foremost, I'm a fan of their music. I'm a fan of them as people and their brands. So that was why I even got on board in the first place.
Yeah.
It's not just to try and make a paycheck or make some commissions. These guys are really great dudes. As you know, Colorado is such a bubbling hot plate for like up and coming talent. There's more and more talent coming to move here.
Oh my God. Like 40, 50
I feel
acts.
like, we're like the hub.
Crazy.
And honestly, Denver and Colorado in general are just a great place for an artist to live, right? We're between the two coasts.
Oh my God.
Routing wise, we have granted the airport's far, but it's a hub for a lot of airlines.
But it's so good.
Yeah.
Coming from somewhere that you had one airport and there was very few flights going to each city.
Yeah.
Like always being able to get out of Denver is amazing.
Totally.
There's 20 flights to one place in one day.
Right. So anyway, point being, I feel like these guys, there's something special, and we'll see where it goes.
Oh my God. I mean, I've talked to individuals who were around in LA. I had aunts and uncles who used to live in Studio City.
Okay.
I was in Burbank a lot as a kid, and a lot of people say that Denver reminds them of LA in like the 60s and 70s,
Really?
as far as like the artistic culture coming up, not only the music, but like the graffiti and the muralists and the post-production houses and the independent filmmakers. It's so cool.
That is cool. I feel
cool.
like Denver and Colorado in general are just a very creative environment, which is great. And that, I mean, that's echoed even within our restaurants and the cool hotels that are popping, you know, it's just like, it's a very trendy city.
It's a very trendy city. And I feel like still arriving as late as I did, like I'm still ahead of the curve. We're going to have so many people come here. It's crazy.
Yeah. We already see it in the traffic.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh my God. So back to, you know, I do see that correlation so many times between the talent buyer and the artist manager, simply because what you said, you know, you have experience in so much of the industry where like you're able to see what like good managers do and how they perform and what they can help with and put them on in the live space, but also like kind of do those exchanges where it's like, hey, I can bring your artist if you can bring my artist just to open the show.
I mean, there's definitely some back doors and some conversation,
which is really cool.
Working with agents and managers for the past 15 years, like, you know, it makes it easier for me to pick up the phone or knock on the door to another market and, you know, try and get one of my acts on there. That being said, I'm not like trying to leverage a position or anything, but it's just experience. It goes back to that relationship thing, right?
And the project has to be there. You know, like the foundation of the music and the brand has to be aligned. But to have that when it's ready, when the project is ready to take off, it always helps.
I think there's something really cool about building an act too. Like, obviously there's a ton of different ways to skin the cat when it comes to management acts bounce from manager to manager or, you know, move to a different company or so on and so forth. But what's exciting for me is like both these guys, you know, are still at a certain level, and like being able to get in with them at that level and trying to help amplify their project is like exciting. And I think that just goes back to, you know, I like to make music at one point too. So it's like, you know, if I can't do it myself, I would love to like be a part of a project. And for both those acts, it's just an opportunity for me to kind of, you know, revisit that, which is exciting. Cool. So that's where the management stuff.
And especially too, I feel like a ton of managers, like I've met managers before that do, you know, they were either DJs before or they were DJs on a regional level and then they went into buying and then they went into artist management. I think it's so cool when a manager does have like music experience. Like it's awesome from, I think as a producer or an artist, you want to hear what a regular consumer thinks. Like I'm always going to show my friend or my boyfriend, somebody who's not listening to all the technical aspects. But it's really cool to be able to send your music to like a manager and be like, hey, like this is a technical thing where I feel like we could have like an actual conversation using musical terms.
I think it's important though,
you know,
too, right? As
cool.
with any art form, you know, management on any, you know, whether it's music or writing or visual stuff, like having somebody that has some depth of knowledge, I think is important because anybody can listen to a song and be like, I like it or I don't. But like to have a level deeper conversation of like, it's too bass heavy or like the top line needs to be tweaked or like the melody
hey, this
isn't very
sucks.
catchy. This sucks. Exactly. I mean, sometimes you have to have those brutally honest. I mean, that's the point, right? To have somebody you can lean on and be like, don't sugarcoat it. Like, just tell me how it is.
Literally. And especially like an EDM where I feel like the shelf life of a song and like the general output that's expected from like just like a producer who's like not incorporating live elements or not, you know, I'm here to DJ, I'm here to do club shows, I'm here to eventually build hard ticket value. You know, they expect a pretty quick output of music, you know, for you to like really be building a project. So many people are like one song a month. And it's like, wow, that's unrealistic. It's also not. And it's like right now, I feel like more than ever because of an aspiring producer's like accessibility to like YouTube tutorials and other artists and one-on-ones with all of these huge artists that I can pay you $200 for production lesson and you can break down your project for me. All of those things with, I feel like today's headliners focusing on like the bass scene, you know, they didn't have those when they came up. They really had to be so incredibly innovative in like what they were doing. And now, you know, from my perspective, it's really easy to sound like anybody you want to.
It is.
But creating that like uniqueness cater to your project and your vision, like that's the hard part. And that's the part that takes a long time.
And that's what I was saying is like one of those three main things, right? Is like what makes this artist stand out from it's a double-edged sword, right? Because it's great that there's all this wealth of knowledge out there. I mean, you can Google how to sound like so and so,
Yep,
right? Pull
yep.
up 16 YouTube videos and probably crank out a tune that sounds kind of like it, right?
Yeah.
Which is great because it's just flourishing, like this music industry and like at this culture of artists. But at the same time, now there's so much, like it's not to the point of oversaturation, but it's almost overwhelming, right? So it's like, how do you sift through all that to find what's really going to resonate, what's really going to pop, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a fun game, right?
It's a fun game.
I mean, it's like a puzzle, right? Especially when it comes to festivals. It's like, how do you look at 5 different stages, you know, and slot everybody so that people aren't complaining about so-and-so playing against so-and-so, you know? It really is a juggling act, but it's super fun. Like I said, at the end of the day, we're producing, you know, shows for people to go have a blast with and connect with their friends with and get exposed to new music and some of their favorite music. So it's like, it's such a cool opportunity.
It's so crazy. And it's cool that you guys do have those like 3 festival properties, because you have Decadence, you have Global Dance, and then you have the Halloween Festival, which is called...
It's called Supernatural.
Supernatural, and that's coming up super soon.
About a month out,
And it's like you have this general rotation where it's like Global's in the summer, you have Supernatural in the fall, and then Decadence in the winter, like going into Q1.
Yeah.
And the availability and the potential to just sift people out and start to build is so cool.
Well, in Colorado is awesome, but obviously we have Red Rocks in our backyard, right? So it's like a lot of it at the end of the day, like that's understandably like a lot of artists' bucket list thing, right? So if they get that Red Rocks date, it kind of like that'll determine where do they fit in the landscape of festivals or an underplay or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's what's tricky but also fun in Colorado, is like working around these.
There's
so
many. It's ran on music.
Yeah.
I'm so confident on the statement that like I've never seen something like the Zedstead Jamboree literally on the Capitol building.
How crazy.
Lawn. Coming from Florida, I'm like, that'd be fucking
after
unreal.
2 Red Rocks shows. It's just like, you know, Denver being able to sustain that kind of show at that capacity for an act like that is just like, it's so cool. I mean, how grateful to be, you know, in this market that we're in.
And it's like forever growing.
Yeah.
Okay, so before I go, I have 2 questions for you.
Okay.
What is your favorite show that you've had the pleasure of booking, festival or club show?
Ooh.
I will say the Decadence lineup this year is fucking insane.
Thank you.
It's insane.
I would say that's the biggest lineup I've put together.
Yeah.
So although it hasn't played out yet, I guess I'll give you 2 answers.
Okay.
Future upcoming Decadence this year, just because it's a monster lineup and I think it's going to be great. Also, New Year's Eve lands on like a Friday, Saturday, which is going to be huge.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be previously, you know, I got to be a part of the Hard Red Rock show before the pandemic. So that was my first time booking Red Rock. So that was bucket list for me as well.
Awesome.
And then what else? Doing the NBA halftime shows for the Nuggets. That's been a fun one.
Oh,
so those
that's
are
so
kind
cool.
of 3 different worlds. And I know you asked for one, but
my God. So how did you get dragged into that?
So obviously the guy I manage, Austin, he's the DJ for the Denver Nuggets. But when I was at Live Nation at the time, they were working on a deal between Live Nation and the Nuggets where we would book all the halftime shows. So I had like Adventure Club and Bear Grylls, and these guys come in and do halftime shows, which was really cool, you know?
That's cool.
Putting them in front of 20,000 people at an NBA game was like awesome for them, awesome for me. You know? It was just
they're like hell yeah.
Really cool. I never, you know, 10 years ago, if you said that I was going to book shows for the NBA, I'd be like,
are you kidding me?
Mind, right? Yeah.
So always keeping your mind open too, though, because I feel like the biggest progressions I've been able to make. I never planned to have this fucking podcast. I just talk a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't like necessarily going out to clubs every night. So this was like my way to network that came out of COVID.
I love it. I've been flicking through these things.
Yeah, and I love it because it's like it allows me to build these conversations and relationships. But like my mind was never open to it. And I think so much of an artist, and I'm sure on the other side you have this like idealization of how your career is supposed to go.
Sure.
And like, hey, I'm gonna be here. I'm gonna work till I get this signing. I'm gonna try and do an exclusive deal with Deadbeats or Disciple, and then hopefully get filtered into UTA and Wasserman, and then my dreams come true. And it never happens that way.
Quite that easy.
Yeah,
right?
It never happens quite that easy. But being open to opportunities like that, you're like, hell yeah, let's go.
I think this is cool though. I mean, this podcast, I think to your credit, is like people also want to see like relatability and like a real person behind it, because so many people focus on, I want to get these shows, I want to redo my logo, I want to make X amount of money. But, once you get to a certain point, a little bit beyond that, I would say, like, fans want to be able to be like, Lizzy's really fucking cool. Like, I watch her podcast every week.
And I learn shit.
Yeah. I mean, it's a two-way street, and I think that goes a long way. And I think you see that with other artists too. It's like the people, Dylan Francis. I mean, look how funny he is.
Dylan Francis,
like, all these guys put out content that's not all music driven. I think that's important that like people, artists specifically, think about and are cognizant of as they're trying to build their careers is like, it's not all business. We're all people at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We all like to hang out and have a good time. So having that level of like this humanness, I think, is important.
Yes, and like breaking down like the fourth wall.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of that happened in COVID when all of a sudden we were doing live streams in like our bedroom.
Right.
And people are like, oh wow, they're like human.
Yeah.
Like they're
right.
like they
I'm
actually
in their living room right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think the pandemic
yeah.
also like kind of clicked for a lot of people in the sense that like we're not the competition seemed to like kind of level out in the sense that
it did. It was an even
we're
playing
all
field.
kind of like in this for the better good, right? Like we all want this to come back, and a lot of people had that like bing, like I'm not against this person, I'm not against this agency, I'm not against what's going on or whatever. So as much as it sucked, I think there were a few positives or
I agree.
Silver lining out of the whole situation.
I agree, and I feel like a lot of artists that you now see starting to take off now that these like makeup shows are starting to be over with.
Yeah.
Really flourished during COVID.
Totally.
And it's really cool because you would not have thought that going into this.
No,
that
totally.
New artists were
And the
come
live
out of
aspect was stripped away. So it's like they had to do these kind of scenarios. They
Yep.
had to do the production tutorials. They had to do, everything they could to maintain relevance and still also try and build at the same time.
Yep, exactly. And then before I go, I need 3 pieces of advice for your local street promoter who, wants to become a buyer, wants to be in a position like you.
3 pieces. I'll try and keep it concise.
Okay.
I would always say like make sure at the core like you're doing it for the music and for the right reasons. Don't try and turn this into like some sort of money grab or something. Like you really need to be into it for the right reasons, and I think that goes without saying. The other would be, like I said, surround yourself with the people that you look up to, pick their brains, soak up as much knowledge as you can, be a part of every conversation you can, meet as many people as you can. And the third, I guess, just stay humble, and never, like I said, try and think you're too big of a like passing out flyers doesn't sound too great to anybody, right? But like that's where a lot of people start, and taking the right steps, and don't try and rush it. There really is, as you were saying, there's not really a fast track. Some people have that explosion, but it can also go down just as quick, So I think the long, steady grind is really where it's at.
Awesome. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Well, Lance, thank you so much for coming on
Thanks
today.
I learned
so much. I love it.
Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.